city of 3 million inhabitants on the Nile.
12 miles from Cairo is Gizeh, the site of the most enigmatic structures known to mankind, the pyramids. The area of the base of the Pyramid of Cheops is about 570,000 square feet. A small town of 500 dwellings could be erected in that space. At its completion, the pyramid was 477 feet high. It has lost only 32 feet of its original height. Passages lead to its interior. The total weight of the pyramid is 6.5 million tons, roughly the weight of 65,000 locomotives. These stone masses were transported from a quarry in the Makadam Mountains on the far banks of the Nile, at a time when men had neither cranes nor trucks. The Sphinx, symbol of the riddle, the eternal enigma, 65 feet high, 237 feet long. Its age is unknown. An old Egyptian proverb says, "The world fears time, but time fears only the pyramids."
EA6736. Ancient Egyptians worshipped lots of animals. At one point or another, you've heard about how cats were highly respected back then, but they also worshipped other animals as well. It's not just cats, okay? So if you're sitting there looking at Mr. Freckles or whatever, don't give him too much praise, okay? There's other worshipped animals to talk about, like baboons. Believe it or not, baboons. They were pretty important pieces to this ancient puzzle. Egyptians had tattoos of baboons, but the most famous piece of history that we have preserved is in the collections of the British Museum in London. There's a mummy on display, and it looks a little different than the rest. EA6736 was recovered from the Temple of Khans in Luxor, Egypt. This little man here dates back to the New Kingdom period, so anywhere around 1550 BC to 10 BC. So yeah, he's a little old. He looks great for his age though, I mean really. Baboons would appear all over art and religion in ancient Egypt. One of my favorite facts ever has to be that in ancient Egypt, pharaohs would train baboons to make arrests. Yeah, imagine stealing a pair for your family and then 4 baboons start chasing you, doing parkour, jumping over houses. It's crazy. Baboons are so smart, no wonder they worship them, honestly. Number 9, Enkidu. This queen was ruling during the 18th dynasty of Egypt. The pharaoh Akhenaten, this was his daughter. She followed in her father's footsteps and was a great ruler, but she was also the wife and half-brother of one King Tut. Her and King Tut had the same father, but their mothers were different. After King Tut's death, however, it's believed this queen may have married the pharaoh shortly after. And perhaps she's buried near him currently in the Valley of the Monkeys. That's why we can't find her. Back in 2010, DNA testing was being done in tomb KB21, where 2 18th dynasty queens were recovered from that tomb in the Valley of the Kings, but not enough data was found from the mummies, but they do know the DNA is from the 18th dynasty royal bloodline, so getting closer. In another tomb though, KB63, numerous coffins were found. One had an imprint of a woman on it along with jewelry, women's clothing, but the biggest clue really was pottery fragments. Of course. We've all played Assassin's Creed. The truth is in the scenery, my friends. The name Patan was on these pottery fragments, and the only person to ever use this name was the lost queen of Enkidu. So we're getting close, but let's maybe, stop destroying other graves in the process. Let's try and find a nicer way to do it. Let's keep hers a secret, maybe. Number 8, King Ramses VIII. Number 8, the 8th. You know what I'm doing. The last son of Ramses III, King Ramses VIII. He's the 7th pharaoh of the 20th dynasty. King Ramses VIII. Okay, history is confusing with these numbers sometimes, I tell ya. I had to proofread that sentence a few times when scripting this one up. This lost king had the throne for a very short amount of time, and historians are trying to understand why. He was the only pharaoh of the 20th dynasty whose tomb is still out there, somewhere in the Valley of the Kings, just waiting. The thing is, with his ruling being so short, the theory out there is that the tomb of KV19 that belonged to the son of Ramses IX, many believe this tomb was originally built for Ramses VIII, but once he became king, everybody was like, maybe not this guy, you know? Yeah, you're not that guy, pal. Apparently you're not that guy. Apparently you weren't that guy. There is a confirmed tomb that was never used for Ramses VIII as well, tomb QV43 in the Valley of the Queens. Made for him, but never used. The poor souls who had to build these, my gosh. Number 7, Luxor tomb. We've been saying 2,500 years ago a lot, and don't get me wrong, that's an awful long time ago with all this ancient history. But in 2014, archaeologists discovered a 4,000-year-old tomb from the 11th dynasty. Yeah, it was tucked away in Luxor, Egypt all this time. Spanish archaeologists found a tomb belonging to a leader from the 11th dynasty. It's pretty obvious this was somebody from the royal family or somebody who was a high-ranking official, because at the time, Luxor was the capital city of ancient Egypt. Officials believe this tomb could have been used as a mass grave due to the, you know, large amount of human remains found inside. That's a pretty jarring clue. It's important to note that this tomb had also been used during the 17th dynasty because tools and utensils from later on in that time were also found in this tomb. We're gonna find a spork in 5,000 years and be like, ah yes, ancient tools for Gogurt. Number 6, the animal tombs. This tomb was found, as you may have guessed, in the Valley of the Kings, like all the great ones here. But this one doesn't sound like the rest. For starters, it's a number rather than a name. What in the Elon Musk is happening here? Whose name was a number? What? Tomb KV50 and KV51 and this one as well all form a group referred to as the animal tombs. Underneath 6 feet of debris, the entrance to these tombs were found. So when we enter a tomb normally that's been untouched, ideally for thousands of years, we can find anything. In fact, whatever they do find, it's a win, I guess. It helps complete this age-long puzzle. So when officials opened KV52 and it was completely empty, that doesn't feel too nice. That's not very warming. It was empty except for 2 boxes, both black and undecorated. The larger of the 2 contained the remains of a monkey, and the smaller one was a chest and it had 4 compartments. Yeah, hauntingly bare compared to what else we have on this list coming up. Number 5. KV55. Okay, we covered KV50, 52, they're all one tomb, but they're not, they're separate tombs. What's going on here? This one was discovered right next to King Tut's tomb, and the reason we call this tomb by a number rather than a name is because, well, we don't know who it was made for, really. The classic, what happened, you know? Even the walls of the tomb inside, they're empty. They aren't covered with any hieroglyphs. There's no artwork, there isn't any clothing laying around, no jewelry. It's quite odd, it's just simply bare. As you walk down the 20 steps towards KV55, you'll notice only a few markings on the entrance. Markings that show that the entrance was once widened since it was first cut, along with its ceiling being raised slightly higher. So adjustments were made at some point. This wasn't a forgotten project by any means. The only hint as to who or what is buried here is remains on the walls. One hieroglyph was found in 1907. One hieroglyph, that's it. And it translates to, "The evil one shall not live again." Okay, so we should leave this alone, right? Yeah, you agree? Hit that thumbs up if you agree. I feel like we agree. Number 4. Ankh-Mahor curse. The walls of some of these tombs have warnings from the gods. One warning trespassers that the gods will wring their neck like that of a goose. That's a pretty good warning. I don't know. If I walked into somebody's property now and it said trespassers' necks will be wrung out like a goose, I'd turn around. You got me. You don't need a beware of dog sign. We're all set with that. You don't need to be an ancient god to get that message across. Just don't break into people's stuff. Don't steal stuff. Inside the found tomb of Ankh-Mahor, a pharaoh official from 4,000 years ago, a curse was written on the walls. It was buried in mastaba. It was an above ground massive tomb, and this warning was the first thing you saw. Might do against this, my tomb, the same shall be done to your property. It also warns of Ankh-Mahor's knowledge of secret spells and magic, and it threatens to fill impure intruders with a fear of seeing ghosts. Again, there's that or beware of dog. You can pick which one you want to put in front of your building. What's more impactful for your property? You decide. Number 3, 2020 tombs. 2020, okay, while most of the world was stuck inside watching documentaries, more than 100 sealed coffins were found. And yes, this time they were occupied. Gross. Found, of course, in Saqqara, Egypt, Egyptian archaeologists have never been more excited, which is a weird thing to say after what I just said. Maybe we'll find the body of Cleopatra. Wouldn't that just be dandy, I guess? The fact that we found over 100 of these still in great shape is mind-blowing. It's actually pretty awesome. Grave robbers have been around since ancient Egyptian days, and for all these to be untouched for this long, that's good. This is great. I'm glad we found it instead of, pirates. The findings date back to 712 BC, which was a period where Egypt was controlled by foreign civilizations, like Persians or Greeks. The idea that we're finding mummies is great and all, but again, do we really need to open them up? Do we need to find Alexander the Great this badly? Like, what is he? It's gonna be bones. It's gonna be goop. Like, we're willing to disrespect this many souls in the process. It's kind of ironic. I don't know. Number 2. Black tomb. We found a mysterious black granite tomb in Alexandria back in 2018. I remember this trending because I made several Brendan Fraser jokes on Twitter. Yeah, a lot of mummy talk happening that weekend. Things got real when the cousin of antiquities minister opened it up. Yeah, we just opened up a mysterious black granite tomb just because we're curious cats. When archaeologists found this massive untouched tomb, untouched for over 2,000 years might I add, on one hand that's a feat in itself, historical, great, discovery, awesome. But us humans, we have to just open it up and take a peek and just smell whatever's inside. Let's just do that, I guess. Maybe it's Alexander the Great, who knows? Egyptian news outlet El Watan reported that the tomb was lifted only a few centimeters before every official involved at the construction site fled the scene. They straight up ran away, it smelled that bad. Mustafa Waziri, Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, the guy put his entire head in the tomb to make sure that it's safe. I mean, or you could just do this with your hand. That works. Why your head? Like, just do one of these. I mean, I get it. The guy's OG. Nothing ended up happening, I think. I don't know. Number 1. King Tut. One of the greatest mysteries is of course the history of the young King Tut. Really young. Younger than you might think. The young boy became pharaoh at age 9 in 1332 BC. During his time ruling, the young king had to face a country in conflict. It wasn't exactly a chill time. At this point, Egypt and Nubia were going head to head over land, and not even 10 years into ruling, the young pharaoh died at age 18. It wasn't until 1922 until he was seen again. Howard Carter discovered the tomb of the lost king, appropriately, as you would have guessed, in the Valley of the Kings. This is where we could have been more careful, historically. When King Tut was discovered, they tried to move his body out of the oil that was coating the coffin after this long. But in doing so, they damaged him. They were too rough. They were too excited with this, old ass dude. So now it's next to impossible to tell what really took his life at such an early age. Yeah, we kind of blew it. We have some ideas though. It's not entirely hopeless. It's believed that King Tut had a broken leg. After some 3D scans were done, it appears the king may have not been in the best shape prior. He may have fallen off a chariot and then simply just cracked his leg, and that's how he died. So if Tut passed at an early age out of nowhere, who was that tomb he was buried in really meant for? Some suggest the tomb was built for the lost queen, Queen Nefertiti, but again, still trying to figure this one out because we haven't found her yet. The former antiquities minister doesn't believe this at all. He strongly stands by his belief that the lost queen was one of the female mummies found in the Valley of the Kings. Tut passed away at 19, so many believe his own burial chamber wasn't even done being built yet, so they just threw him in hers. How rude is that? History is pretty rude. I don't know. If I can sum up history, I'd say it's rude. Yeah, that's a fair word. We still haven't found her final resting place, but with the aid of technology and 3D scans, I have a feeling we're getting pretty close.
This one is either number 1 or number 10. This is probably the most famous mummy curse of all, so I could squeeze it into the number 1 spot, but also I want to keep this list a little bit unpredictable. This tomb was opened back in 1923, and on the wall of the tomb, it read, "Death shall come on swift wings to those who disturb the peace of the pharaoh." That is a pretty clear message. I don't know why no one picked up on the fact that something was going to go down if they open up this tomb. But as we know, when it comes to colonizing, the people involved rarely pay attention to the negatives. The leader of this excavation died from blood poisoning, and 7 more people died prematurely. There's one thing that I will never do, and it is open up some old mummy tomb because I don't need that bad mojo in my life. I only want good vibes that get brought on from drinking ocean spray and riding a longboard. Coming in at number 9, we have the severed hand. If you're super rich and powerful, I think you reach a point where you just start collecting things because you have nothing else to conquer. Instead of finding some sort of inner peace and moving away from material life, you just consume endlessly, trying to fill the empty void inside you, but trust me, it doesn't work. Sir Bruce Ingram was a rich and powerful person in England, and he had some friends who were digging up mummies in Egypt. One of his pals sent him over a mummy hand, and it was a gift, not something I would want to be sent. I'm more into practical gifts. I would be happier with a kettlebell. But something Ingram's friend should have told him was that there was a bracelet on the hand that said, "Curse be to he who moves my body." Yeah, I definitely prefer the kettlebell over a cursed mummy hand. Well, the curse came in full swing when Ingram's home caught on fire and then was hit by a flood. I guess in one way you could look at this as a blessing because water puts out fire, but his home was trashed. Coming in at number 8, we have the Curse of Senmut. Some curses haven't got the opportunity to activate. On the wall of Senmut's tomb it says, "His life shall not exist on earth." That's a pretty clear threat and a curse I don't want to dabble with. However, this guy might get his shot soon. soon. People are currently working on this tomb to make it a public attraction. I'm sure one person going through there will slip up and get cursed. Also, the translation says his life shall not exist on Earth, so I think ladies are free to visit. Coming at number 7, we have mummies on a boat. Someone get Sam Jam on the phone. I have an idea for a movie. This story comes from 1699. Mummies must have been a huge hit back then. There was no TV, so digging up some old dusty bones with witchcraft attached to them would have been one of the most exciting things you could do. Well, in 1699, a book came out called Treatise of Embalming. There was apparently a true story in this book that talked about a man who was transporting 2 mummies he had just purchased via sailboat, and something very strange started happening. The ghost of the 2 men started to appear on the boat. These visions were terrifying and probably a warning that something worse was about to come. So this man did the intelligent thing and he threw the 2 mummies overboard. If he had kept them on board, they would have eaten him up faster than Joey Chestnut eats tube-shaped meat.
Oh, sorry, guys. 3, 2, 1, go! It's the 100th anniversary and we are underway.
Coming at number 6, we have the Curse of Himuru. This is a nice sounding curse on the wall of some guy's tomb. It reads, I shall seize his neck like that of a goose. So this dude isn't going to put a curse on you that will give you some sort of sickness that takes you out. He's going to personally come to you and choke you to death. Also, they had geese in ancient Egypt? Who knew? I thought the first goose was born when Wayne Gretzky scored his first goal. Coming in at number 5, we have a cursed thief. Here's the thing. If you're gonna steal, you need to follow these tenets. Make sure you don't get caught. Make sure the item has high resale value, and make sure that the item you're stealing isn't cursed. If you follow those rules, you'll be a master thief before you know it. But this is one of the most famous stories in Don't Mess with Mummies. A German tourist decided he would visit an Egyptian tomb and steal something from a mummy. Little did he know you're not supposed to do that. The tourist eventually got extremely sick, became paralyzed, and then died from a mysterious cause. Now, what made this case so famous was when his stepson sent the cursed item back to Egypt. It arrived at the German embassy in Egypt with a note saying that the son felt in order to lift the curse from his family, he had to return the artifact to Egypt. Coming in at number 4, we have the Book of the Dead, a spell book from ancient Egypt that has been said to give the person who can control it the power to control the dead and walk amongst those from the afterlife. That sounds like quite the party trick. I don't know if that would be something I would mess around with in my day-to-day. I try to avoid death at all costs, so trying to decipher a cursed book of the dead sounds like it would give me the future I would not be looking for. And it should be no surprise that Aaron Amber, one of the men involved in excavating the Book of the Dead, died just a few years after it was dug up. Him and his wife were hosting a wondrous dinner party. They were probably bragging about this amazing book they found, and someone made an offhanded joke about ancient Egypt, and then next thing you know, Amber's house was on fire and he died there. So I don't know if you want to try and read that book, but I think I'll skip the opportunity for supernatural powers at the risk of death. Coming in at number 3, we have the Curse Consumes You. I don't know what it would be like to be cursed. I can imagine it wouldn't be fun. I think it's probably the feeling you have when you haven't done your homework and you know it's due tomorrow but you still don't do it, and now you just have to sit there in your anxiety while you continue to not do it. If anyone has survived an ancient Egyptian curse, let me know in the comments. But for archaeologist Hugh Evelyn White, it would seem that the curse was able to work its way into his soul and take his life. White was found dead after he committed suicide by hanging himself. White was an archaeologist who disturbed quite a few mummies in his day, so if curses are real, it's safe to say that this dude had a curse or two attached to him. Now this is where the urban legend surrounding his death works its way in. Apparently there was a note left behind that said, I have succumbed to the curse which forces me to disappear. The note might be made up to add some spice to the story, but if it's real, you can bet I will never dig again just in case I bump into any mummies. Coming in at number 2 is the Curse of Osiris. You think if you were digging up a tomb in ancient Egypt and you found a statue of the god of death, you would just turn around and go home. Like, not even back to base camp. You would just pack up all your things, fly all the way home, and start working as a used car salesman. Just a complete fresh start. Well, some people aren't as quick to abandon ship as me, and maybe they should be, because back in 1971 there was an excavation of a mummy's tomb in Saqqara. The head Egyptologist came across a statue of Osiris, and instead of going through with the little game plan I just laid out, he removed the statue of the god of death from the tomb and took it back to his office with his assistants. Once him and his assistant were settled in, he stepped into the bathroom to relieve himself, and that's when his assistant heard screaming coming from the bathroom. He rushed in to find the Egyptologist on the ground. He succumbed to some sort of paralysis and then died the next day. So a mystery paralysis that kills you in less than 24 hours could be explained by medical science or a spell from the god of death. Coming in at the number 1 spot, we have Titanic mummy. We like to think that the Titanic sank because of human ignorance, and that's probably what happened. Saying that a boat was unsinkable in the early 20th century is one of the most insane claims you can make, but it's still fun to speculate on the supernatural. But this is how the story goes, and just so we're clear, the majority of this story is 100% true. There was a museum in England that was housing the mummy of the Princess of Anamera. It was a wonderful piece of history, but it was said to be cursed. Rumors of the curse being true seemed to solidify when a museum guard died out of nowhere. So the museum thought it would be a good idea to get this thing the hell out of there and then send it off to America. This priceless mummy from ancient Egypt worked its way onto the Titanic, and then we know what happened from there. Some people seem to think that it was the curse from this ancient mummy that brought down the unsinkable ship, and maybe they're right.
The retainer sacrifice. During the first dynasty in Egypt about 5,000 years ago, people practiced a very particular form of human sacrifice. When a pharaoh or other noble died, their servants would also be killed so that they could serve them in the afterlife. Back then, the ancient Egyptians centered their whole culture and religion on the life to come. The pharaohs wanted to live as they had done in their normal lives, being served by those who had served them, surrounded by luxury and a life of ease. That's why they were always buried with great treasures, and in the early days, they were surrounded by the bodies of their servants. It's thought that most, if not all, the servants were actually more than willing to be sacrificed. It's thought that they may have seen being sacrificed at their king's death as the only way to secure eternal life, which, after all, was the whole purpose of life to begin with. That's not to say they wouldn't feel the fear that any of us would if we knew we were about to be sacrificed. Next up at number 9 now, we have the spinning artifact. In 2013, a story went viral from Manchester Museum in England. Locked behind a glass cabinet, an ancient Egyptian statue had been inexplicably spinning in place. Even though nobody could actually touch it, the statue was spinning throughout the day. None of the other statues nearby were though. It was a 10-inch statue of Neb-Sanu, which dates back nearly 4,000 years ago and was found in a mummy's tomb. This time-lapse video shows it turning during the day, but at night it remained totally still. As the story travelled, many people came to visit it and see this cursed object for themselves. Some pointed to the ancient Egyptian belief that if a mummy is destroyed, a statue like this can act as an alternative vessel for the spirit. So, was this statue really holding the spirit of a 4,000-year-old mummy? Well, some still think so, but it appears the spinning was actually caused by vibrations from buses outside and people walking through the museum. Since then, they glued the statue down and it hasn't moved anymore, for now at least. Next up at number 8 now, we have the burning. The ancient Egyptians believed that Ra was the sun god and that he created the world. He was revered and worshipped by the ancient Egyptians. That's why it was very serious if someone vandalized or robbed a temple that was dedicated to him. Those who were found guilty of disrespecting the sun god were burned alive. For the ancient Egyptians, this was seen as the ultimate insult to a person's dignity, as their spirit would have no body to dwell in. Next up at number 7 now, we have King Tut's curse. King Tut is the name for Tutankhamun, also known as the Boy King. In 1923, this young pharaoh's tomb was discovered by 2 archaeologists by the name of Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon. Now they found an inscription on the entrance to the tomb with these chilling words: "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." The archaeologists did not heed the warning though and entered the tomb anyway. They found treasures beyond anything that had been found before. The artifacts were taken out along with Tutankhamun's mummy and sent off to museums around the world. 6 weeks after this, Lord Carnarvon died. He was only the first though. After that, relatives of the people who opened the tomb kept dying in mysterious circumstances. One case involved their personal secretary being found dead in her bed, which in turn drove her father to suicide. In total, there were 11 deaths that have been linked to King Tut's curse. Some say they were just coincidences, others say there may be something to the curses of the ancient Egyptians. Moving on to number 6 now, we have the priest ghost. In 2017, ghost hunters caught what they believed to be the spirit of an ancient Egyptian priest on camera right next to his own tomb. Ghost hunting couple Sean Reynolds and Rebecca Palmer were standing in a tomb of a priest called Nasiamun. Now he lived in ancient Egypt over 3,000 years ago, and his tomb is now in Leeds City Museum in England. They set up electrical readers to pick up energy signals and were starting to get quite freaked out when this happened.
Okay.
Oh God.
Oh my God, Paul, look. Oh. And that was me, but look, that's going off.
No.
Just as Rebecca reported seeing an orb on her camera, a shadow of a person is seen darting across the floor towards the tomb. They said the top of the shadow was in the shape of a pointed hood and it walked straight towards that tomb. Now they believe it could be the spirit of the priest, lost and wandering for eternity after his tomb has been moved thousands of miles away. Moving on to number 5 now, we have the Great Pyramids. These are perhaps some of the most famous landmarks left by the ancient Egyptians. They are tombs of pharaohs meant to help them reach the afterlife and become gods. As such, it's no surprise that some of them have haunted stories attached to them. Many eyewitnesses reports have recorded a man and his 3 children roaming around the Great Pyramids looking for something, who knows what. Some have presumed he is searching for his wife and the mother of his children. Another creepy story involving the haunting of the pyramids is Pharaoh Khufu himself emerging from the pyramid where he is buried. He is dressed in traditional ancient Egyptian armor. He appears at midnight and walks the streets, visiting houses and telling the inhabitants to leave the area. If ghosts have unfinished business to linger around here on Earth, it looks like Khufu has some serious unfinished business left. Next up at number 4 now, we have the confession. In ancient Egypt, police brutality was an everyday occurrence. It wasn't really a bad thing that people would protest about, it was just the way things were. It was the norm. When it came to extracting confessions from criminals, nothing was too far. Torture was a very common method used by the police. Torture victims were forced to name accomplices in crimes, to reveal the hiding place of stolen goods, and to describe the methods used in a crime through torture. Information on methods allowed the authorities to strengthen security measures. The most common torture method was called the bastinado, which involved beating the bottom of the foot with a stick. Moving on to number 3 now, we have the Titanic. Some people believe that an ancient Egyptian curse is responsible for sinking the Titanic. The story goes like this. There was once a mummy board called the Unlucky Mummy. It wasn't actually a mummy at all. It was a painted wooden board of an unidentified woman. When it was moved to the British Museum in London, staff began to report strange goings on. They would hear loud banging coming from the artifact. One man took a photograph of it and the picture looked nothing like the real thing. Its eyes stared furiously out of the picture and were described as malevolent. A few weeks later, the same photographer died in mysterious circumstances. A while later, one of the guards whose job it was to watch over the board also died. As the creepy stories mounted, the museum was said to get so sick of it that they sold the board to an American archaeologist. And so in 1912 he set sail with the mummy board from England to America. That ship was the Titanic. Some believe the mummy board was responsible for the sinking of the Titanic, others say it never left England at all. Still an interesting story either way. Next up at number 2 now, we have the mummy ghosts. In 1699, Louis Pinnicher talked about one of the first mummy curses in his book called Treatise on Embalming. He told a story of a Polish man who had purchased 2 mummies from Alexandria in Egypt, hoping to study them for medical purposes. As he was sailing across the Mediterranean Sea, he began to have visions of 2 ghosts. They kept appearing on the boat and would somehow keep pace no matter how fast or slow they went. They could never quite lose them, but they could never actually catch up to them. The man ordered the crew to throw the mummies they had into the sea, despite the fact that he had just paid a handsome sum for them. As soon as that happened, it seems like the curse was lifted. The clouds parted and the vision stopped altogether. And finally, number 1 now, we have love potions. While they may be resigned to fantasy in our modern times, alchemy, potions, and yes, even love potions were a very real thing for some ancient Egyptians. They could be used to win over the object of a person's affection, or just to cause trouble, enact revenge, or exploit people with the power of love. While that may sound interesting, the reality of how to make one is pretty grim, if I'm honest. One recipe involved taking the dandruff from the scalp of a dead person who had been murdered, mixing that with 7 grains of barley buried in the grave of a dead man, and crushing all of that together with 10 apple pips. Then add black dog's blood from a tick, some of your own blood, and a man's semen. Crush that all together, put it in a cup of wine, recite a formula, and bam, you've apparently got yourself a love potion, even if it did require a lot of death and murder.
Spot, we have construction technique. So I'm starting us off with one of the most widely known mysteries. How the heck were these things built? Although around 120 pyramids were built in ancient Egypt, there is a complete lack of records that explain how the pyramids were constructed. There are many theories, of course. Some believe the ancient Egyptians used a mix mixture of sleds and wet sand due to a painting in Khufu's tomb that shows men dragging a colossal statue on a sled while a person in front pours water onto the sand. Apparently, when the correct amount of water is used, it can increase the stiffness of the sand and reduce the friction between the object being dragged and the ground, making the object much easier to move. But even if that is exactly how they got the blocks to the site, how did they build the actual pyramid? Ramps are a common suggestion, but truth be told, it is just a theory and no one has been able to confirm once and for all exactly how they did it. That being said, the most entertaining theory, of course, is that aliens came down to Earth to help them, but until concrete evidence is found, the mystery endures. Moving on to number 9, the purpose of pyramids. While most historians can agree that the primary function of many of the pyramids was to serve as tombs for pharaohs, some researchers suggest that they may have had additional purposes. But what could these be? Well, some have theorized they were used as astronomical observatories or as power plants, while some even wonder if machines were somehow being used or created to harness natural energies. Of course, these theories remained completely speculative, but isn't it strange that after all this time, no one is able to say for certain the exact purpose of these colossal structures? Moving on to number 8. Queen Nefertiti. During the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt, Nefertiti was the great royal wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten, recognized for her great beauty and respected for her immense power. Now, her and her husband were known for their radical overhaul of state religious policy, in which they promoted the earliest known form of single deity religion centered on the sun disk. And with her husband, she reigned at what was arguably the wealthiest period of ancient Egyptian history. However, for all her fame and glory in the history books, one thing still remains unanswered: her fate after 1330 BC. You see, despite her influence, her presence completely disappears from historical records after a certain point. And to make matters more mysterious, her tomb has never been found. Some have theorized that her tomb is hidden inside the pyramids, but if that is the case, no one can figure out why it would be hidden in the first place. So to this day, whether her tomb lies inside the ancient pyramids remains a mystery. Moving on to number 7, pyramid alignment. There are a lot of inexplicable things surrounding the elusive pyramids. As we already covered, one of the mysteries involves how they were constructed, and of course the ongoing conspiracy of alien involvement. However, another inexplicable mystery is the precise alignment they fall in. So essentially, the pyramids of Giza are perfectly aligned with the cardinal points, north, south, east, and west, with incredible accuracy. In fact, the alignment is so precise that it's difficult to explain how the ancient Egyptians achieved such precise orientation without modern technology. So many Egyptologists have of course wondered, was this alignment achieved by chance, or does it indicate an advanced understanding of astronomy? Could this be another mystery pointing towards alien involvement? Who knows? I mean, historians are probably not jumping to that conclusion, to be fair. But many have used this to back up their own theories about the extraterrestrial hand in the pie. Coming in at number 6, precision. Sort of along the lines of the mystery of construction and alignment is the precise measurements and geometry of the pyramids. Looking back, it is fascinating and a little mysterious to observe, as advanced mathematical knowledge would have to been required to achieve the level of precision shown in the pyramids. In comes the aliens. Again, we can't get away from them. There are countless speculations that the ancient Egyptians acquired this advanced knowledge from an alien species. And I mean, of course, there's no way to confirm this, but whether you believe the alien theory or not, the fact of the matter is that where and how they acquired this knowledge is still up for debate. Coming in at number 5. Why did they stop? So not only do historians question how the pyramids were built, but the other million-dollar question is, why did they stop? So the last royal pyramid was built around 1500 BCE, and afterwards, while wealthy individuals were occasionally buried in or near pyramids, pharaohs were instead buried in the Valley of Kings near Thebes. But what exactly caused the rulers of Egypt to abandon their practice of pyramid burials? We aren't totally sure. One theory is that religious changes around 1500 BCE began emphasizing building tombs underground in the bedrock rather than in pyramids. Another theory points out that because tomb robbing was a major issue, that there were far less chance that burials would be looted if they weren't placed in such conspicuous settings. Another theory put forward by engineer Peter James came after he discovered that the extreme temperature fluctuations of the Egyptian desert were causing the limestone to expand and contract, which in turn meant that the stone blocks began moving to the edges of the pyramid, which would force them to detach or break, taking the outer casing with them. He theorizes this disintegration likely happened while pyramid building was still occurring, and after spending so much time, money, and energy creating perfect monuments, this visible and rapid destruction of the perfection could have been one reason pharaohs abandoned them as burial monuments altogether. But again, it's just all speculation. Moving on to number 4, far away from home. In 2013, archaeologists in Israel found something they'd never expected to find so far away from Egypt: a 4,000-year-old Egyptian sphinx. Specifically, they found the paws of the statue, and it's believed the rest of it was deliberately destroyed thousands of years ago. But here's the thing: nobody knows what an Egyptian statue was doing in Israel. The only clue left behind is an inscription on the base that bears the name King Menkore, who was a pharaoh that ruled over Egypt around 2500 BC. Was it something that was handed over after a losing bet? We're not totally sure. It's highly unlikely that Tel Hazor, Israel was conquered by the Egyptians, because at the time Tel Hazor was a trading hub in Canaan directly between Egypt and Babylon. This meant it would have been vital for the economy that the two biggest powers in the area remained on good terms. So a gift? Maybe, though it's not clear why King Menkore would have sent it or why anyone would have shattered it. All we really know is that for some reason there is a sphinx 1,000 kilometers away from the Great Sphinx of Giza. Moving on to number 3, mysterious cavities in the Pyramid of Khufu. In 2017, Scan Pyramids made a massive discovery inside the Pyramid of Khufu. With the aid of a non-invasive scanning technique that uses cosmic rays to produce 3D images, researchers discovered 2 previously unknown voids inside the pyramid, making them the first new spaces found inside the pyramid since the 19th century. But of the 2 voids, the larger one was particularly interesting. Not much is known about this larger chamber. It is apparently unlikely to be a burial chamber, but historians theorize it could be a second grand gallery, or more intriguingly, hold some of the secrets to the engineering and construction behind the pyramids. But truth be told, they have no clue why it's there or what its purpose would have been during ancient Egypt, as the Egyptians deliberately built the hidden chamber to be completely inaccessible. There are no corridors or pathways connected to it, and the only way they could have put anything inside is if they filled the chamber while they were building the pyramid, then sealed it up afterward. Were they trying to hide something? We may never know. Coming in at number 2, the Pyramid of Djedefre. Son of the pharaoh Khufu, Djedefre was Khufu's successor and ruled during the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom of Egypt. However, it is believed that Djedefre's reign was plagued by political and religious controversies, and that he wasn't Egypt's favorite ruler. Still, he, like his father, wanted his pyramid to have the highest point of any pyramid in Egypt. But there was one problem. He didn't have the resources to build the biggest pyramid. So Djedefre used a little workaround to make sure the tip of his tomb was just a little bit taller than everybody else's, and built it on a hill. However, The mystery about this pyramid, compared to the others, is it's no longer standing. For some reason, while all the other pyramids of Egypt are still standing after thousands of years, Djedefre's pyramid has been totally destroyed, and all we are left with today is the base. Now, being a mystery and all, it's not entirely clear what's happened to it. Some think that Djedefre simply died before they were able to get much of the work done and his pyramid was left in ruins. Another theory suggests that Romans quarried it for stones 2,000 years ago, and so it was simply torn down. And the most chaotic theory is that others think that the people of Egypt simply hated Djedefre so much that they were willing to pull apart an entire pyramid just out of spite. And last up in our number 1 spot, a mysterious queen. There are of course many tombs within the Great Pyramids of Egypt, and while they're all interesting in their own right, this one in particular is still puzzling historians and Egyptologists. In 2015, archaeologists stumbled upon the tomb of a woman who was buried among the Great Pyramids of the Old Kingdom of Egypt. In her tomb were inscriptions calling her both the wife and the mother of the king. Now, they were able to decipher a few things. This woman would have been alive 4,500 years ago and would have been one of the most important and powerful people on the planet at that time. So why have we never heard of her, and why can't we figure out who she was? Historians have dubbed her Kentekawes III under the assumption that she was the daughter of Queen Kentekawes II, and think she may have been the wife of the pharaoh Neferefre and the mother of the pharaoh Mekar. But again, they don't really know, they're just guessing. Whoever she was once an incredibly powerful woman, but today she is a little more than an enigma.
The downfall. To start this list off, let's talk about one of the things that happened just before the transition into the first intermediate period of ancient Egypt. It is important to note some of the causes of the fall of the Old Kingdom, which is what brought forth this period of chaos and turmoil. One reason that is often cited is the extremely long reign of Pepe II, who was the last pharaoh of the 6th dynasty. His reign began while he was a child, and it is believed that he lived to possibly into his 90s, which, like, first of all, that's incredible. Imagine that guy with modern medicine and plumbing. I'm just saying. But of course, while that's wild to see that long of a reign, especially back in those times, his lengthy life proved to cause some issues for succession because the guy outlived all of his heirs. Because of this sort of disorganization, it led to the regime of the Old Kingdom kind of being disintegrated. In our number 9 spot today we have the Nile. The overflowing of the Nile was a very important time for ancient Egyptians. It is a super important cycle for them that was actually celebrated annually for 2 weeks. In the intermediate period, it is thought that the overflowing of the Nile, which really was necessary to their way of life, was lessened, or it may have potentially been non-existent for a period due to a drier climate, which is said to have potentially led ancient Egypt and its citizens into a terrible famine. The drier climate and the lack of the Nile inundation would have resulted in lower crop yields, which would have a significant impact on those living in the area at the time. In our number 8 spot today we have disorganization. Like I kind of mentioned in the first point, part of the reason this intermediate period is often referred to as the Dark Ages is due to the lack of organization within the kingdom. Manetho, who is a historian and priest from the Ptolemaic era, would describe 70 kings who ruled in 70 days. This is likely a bit sarcastic and an exaggeration, but it's meant to show how chaotic things were at the time in terms of leadership. This period of time can sometimes be overlooked in terms of leadership because there is very little known about who was actually leading during this time. It is possible that the 7th dynasty may have been more of an oligarchy, which would have likely been composed of officials of the 6th dynasty. There unfortunately is very little in terms of both textual as well as architectural evidence that survived this period, so much of what really went on remains a secret. In our number 7 spot today we have artifacts. During the time of the 7th and 8th dynasty, while it is true that we have little to go on, there have been a few interesting artifacts found that are believed to belong to this time period. There have been scarabs that have been found that are believed to have belonged to Neferker II of the 7th dynasty. There was also a green jasper cylinder that is believed to have come from the 8th dynasty. There was even a small pyramid that was constructed by King Ebi of the 8th dynasty that has been identified at Saqqara. While we have found these things, there are some rulers from this time whose positions remain unknown to this day. It is entirely possible that we may never know where some of these rulers lie. In our number 6 spot today we have literature. While this entire period of time is incredibly interesting, one super cool thing is that the emergence of what is considered literature by our more modern standards seems to have occurred during this period of time. This led to the birth of new literary prowess in the Middle Kingdom, the age that came after this period. There is one specific piece that is very important historically, and that is the Ipuwer papyrus. Although this piece of literature is not dated to this period, it is widely believed that it is likely referring to this intermediate period, and it records the decline in both international relations as well as just the general impoverishment that was seen in ancient Egypt at the time. In our number 5 spot today we have nomarchs. Another problem that really contributed to the fall of the Old Kingdom and the introduction into this more difficult period of time was the rise in power of provincial nomarchs. A nomarch was a provincial governor in ancient Egypt. Since the country was divided into 42 different provinces, which were called nomes, there would be a government official that was responsible for each one. Nearing the beginning of the first intermediate period, the position of nomarch had become a hereditary one, which of course meant that one family was likely to hold the position and the power for quite some time. This of course meant that these families, with every year, would only get more powerful and more influential within their nome, which left them becoming more independent from their overall ruler. These nomarchs were beginning to have their own tombs built, and they began putting together their own armies, and of course this went on to create conflict with those surrounding them. This not only created tensions, but it created warfare. In our number 4 spot today we have division. Once things kind of settled from the chaos of the fall of the Old Kingdom and the bizarrities of the 7th and 8th dynasties, it was realized that Egypt was now kind of divided when it came to ruling, as there were two competing power bases. One of those bases was at Heracleopolis, which was located in Lower Egypt, and the other was at Thebes in Upper Egypt. Those in Lower Egypt had their rule for approximately 94 years, and their kings comprised the 9th and 10th dynasties, each with 19 rulers. The founder of the 9th dynasty, Kheti I, is often described as quite an evil and violent ruler who caused a lot of harm to those living in Egypt at the time. It is said that he was, quote, seized with madness, which I'm not entirely sure what that means, but it is likely hinting towards some sort of mental health issue. In the end, it is said that he met his demise at the hands of a crocodile, which, I mean, leaves me with a lot of questions. In our number 3 spot today we have the buffer zone. Within the Heracleopolitan kingdom there was a powerful and wealthy province of Siut, or Asiut, which really rose to prominence during this otherwise difficult time. A new line of nomarchs began to rise out of this area, and they maintained quite a close relationship with the kings of Lower Egypt. We were able to discover this through what was inscribed on their tombs. These inscriptions provided a look into what the political situations were like during their reigns, and it describes this line of nomarchs as digging canals, reducing taxation, reaping rich harvests, raising cattle herds, and maintaining an army and fleet. Again, we are talking about a time that is referred to as the Dark Ages, so this sort of success was a big deal. Despite this thriving political situation, the Siut province acted as a sort of buffer zone between the dueling Upper and Lower Egypt, which means that it also bore a lot of the brunt of the attacks that were coming down to Lower Egypt from Thebes. In our number 2 spot today we have the Upper Egypt rulers. We spoke briefly about those who were ruling Lower Egypt at the time, so what about Upper Egypt? Well, the Theban kings are said to have been descendants of Intef, who is the nomarch of Thebes, often referred to as the keeper of the door to the south. Intef is often credited with organizing Upper Egypt into the independent ruling body from the south that it went on to become, but despite this it doesn't appear as though he ever tried to claim the title of king himself. Intef II began the attack attack of northern Egypt, and his successor Intef III completed that attack, which then left him to begin the move into Middle Egypt and the attack on Lower Egypt. The first 3 kings of the 11th dynasty, all named Intef, would also become the last 3 kings of the first intermediate period. In our number 1 spot today we have the Middle Kingdom. With all of the political chaos that was going on and with the competition for power, this resulted in a lot of violence. Prior to the military conflict, it is said that temples were pillaged, artwork was vandalized, and statues of different kings were destroyed. After the reign of the Intefs, they were succeeded by a line of kings who were called Mentuhotep. The second in this line is the ruler who would go on to eventually defeat the kings and rulers of Lower Egypt, those in the Heracleopolitan Kingdom. This is important because it marked a new shift in ancient Egypt. This defeat marked the unification of the country, the continuation of the 11th dynasty, and it brought Egypt into the time of the Middle Kingdom.
Let's jump right in. And we're going to start off the list with a very recent find. This just happened last month, which was February of 2024 for those who may be possibly watching in the distant future. A dude stumbled on a massive ancient Roman artifact in a riverbed. It was found in the gravel of the Torre River in San Vito al Torre. Arvino Silvestri was the one who first spotted the ancient artifact and alerted archaeologists. The riverbank was excavated, and the archaeologists uncovered a massive block of carved limestone, revealing it to be an ancient Roman funeral monument, weighed in at a whopping 13,000 pounds, and it was in pretty good condition. It's so big and heavy that it required an excavator for transportation. Pretty remarkable find, and quite beautiful as well. It has an intricately carved figure of Erotes on one end, holding a torch and a poppy flower. Erotes symbolized various things, including love and death. The decoration style suggested that the monument was from the high imperial era of ancient Rome, but at this point we still don't have an exact date range. At least it hasn't been released to the public yet. Again, this is still a very new find, but this wasn't all they found either. There was also a stone urn, a limestone carving depicting a man's face, and a number of bricks and tile pieces. Next on the list is what I'm just going to call the treasure trove. Now, this news just came out last week at the time of recording this video. Archaeologists in Panama unearthed an ancient burial site filled with treasures at El Caño Archaeological Park. The burial dates back between 750 AD and 800 AD and looks like it must have belonged to an elite lord. The burial revealed the remains of a high-status man who was likely between 30 and 40 when he died. Aside from bones though, there was a whole bunch of treasure. Breastplates, belts adorned with gold, beads, intricate bracelets, earrings. There were even a pair of crocodile-shaped earrings, which is pretty cool. They also found gold-covered sperm whale teeth earrings. How extravagant is that? Not only do I have a necklace with whale teeth, but I gotta get them coated in gold too. That's not even all they found. They also uncovered bracelets and skirts made from dog teeth, bone flutes, and a bunch of pottery pieces. And on top of all the beautiful stuff this guy was buried with, he was also accompanied by a number of people who were sacrificed. He was incredibly rich, so he was just too above going into the afterlife alone. Next on the list, we have a horrifying pit of severed hands. Apparently severed hands were a big deal in ancient Egypt. Archaeologists made a pretty gruesome discovery when they came across pits filled with severed human hands. They were found during excavations of a palace near the ancient city of Avaris. These pits contained hundreds of severed hands, neatly stacked together, and the largest pit was right in front of the throne room. Researchers believe that these hands were severed from enemies captured in battles or raids. It's not entirely clear why these hands were collected and stored, but there have been images found of soldiers trading severed hands for gold, so some speculate that they might have been offerings to the gods or simply just trophies of victory. Next up, we have the Herxheim Archaeological Site. So back in 1996, during routine excavations, archaeologists came across this pit filled with human remains. Now, that's gotta be alarming even for an archaeologist. I can't imagine you ever get bored with finding human remains, but what made this find even creepier was how these folks had died. They weren't just the remnants of ordinary burials. There were signs that these people had been deliberately and systematically consumed by other humans. The bones all showed signs of butchering. Cut marks indicated careful dismemberment. It looked like these individuals were not just victims of violence, but also of ritualistic consumption. The pit contained the bones of over 500 people, dating back to the Neolithic period. Some suggest these folks were eaten as part of some sort of religious ritual, but other researchers think this may have been more a case of desperation. Possibly there could have been a famine. Next up, we have Neanderthal markings. So the recent discovery of ancient cave markings thought to be made by Neanderthals is obviously pretty exciting. The markings were found on the walls of a cave in central France and are believed to be over 57,000 years old, which would make them the oldest of their kind. The cave was first stumbled upon in 1846 during some quarrying work. It wasn't until 1912 that the archaeological finds started cropping up though, with a discovery of animal bones and tools that had likely belonged to Neanderthals. The cave seemed to have been sealed off from the outside world around 57,000 years ago, which is a hefty chunk of time before modern humans even set foot in the region around 42,000 years ago. So it's a solid bet that the finger marks on the walls were the handiwork of Neanderthals. So what are these markings exactly? They're a series of wavy lines, dots, and faint striations, and it's believed that Neanderthals created these engravings by sweeping and pressing their fingers across a thin line of film on the limestone walls. The height of the markings suggests they were made by taller beings, teenagers or adults, but were they decorative, ritualistic, were they even made intentionally? They're still not sure. Now we head back to Egypt with the discovery of an ancient Roman city in Luxor. The news about this incredible find was announced back in January of 2023. Egyptian archaeologists found a very well-preserved Roman city in Luxor, dating back to the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE. It's now been described as the oldest and most important city found on the eastern bank of Luxor, by Mustafa Waziri, head of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities. The archaeological team unearthed a whole whackload of these ancient structures, including residential buildings, offering insights into how people lived during that time. There were also the discovery of 2 pigeon towers used for housing carrier birds, meaning this city was very likely involved in communication networks at the time. There were also metal workshops found in the city that contained whole collections of artifacts of their own, pots, tools, and a collection of bronze and copper Roman coins. Next up, we have the 4,500-year-old tomb. This is another recent 2024 archaeological discovery. I really tried to fill this list up with new stuff. So this discovery was made about 20 miles south of Cairo. Egyptian and Japanese archaeologists stumbled on an ancient Egyptian tomb carved into rock over 4,000 years ago. I always say stumbled on, like these archaeologists are just kind of walking around and they're like, oh, it's an ancient tomb. Obviously there's more that goes into it than that. It's just the easiest way for my brain to wrap my head around it. They stumbled on it. So anyway, the tomb was carved into rock over 4,000 years ago, dated back between 2649 and 2150 BC. The tomb contained a whole bunch of graves and artifacts from different historical periods. During their excavation, the team unearthed a bunch of treasures. There were human remains buried alongside a vividly colored mask, a burial site from the 2nd dynasty, and an incredibly well-preserved alabaster vessel from the 18th dynasty. In the tomb, there were also 2 terracotta statues depicting the ancient Egyptian goddess Isis and Harpocrates, along with a stela with a man's name encrypted on it, a man named Heroides. I think that's how you pronounce it. You've all heard of the Moai statues on Easter Island before, I know, but just last year, archaeologists found a new one. This new statue adds to the nearly 1,000 that have already been found on the island. This latest statue was uncovered in a dry lake bed, the only one to be found in that location. So far, anyway. The discovery was made by the organization that oversees the island's national park. Terry Hunt, a professor of archaeology at the University of Arizona, was incredibly excited about the find and described how important it is that these statues be retrieved, helping to preserve the history of the Rapa Nui people. So with how much attention and research has gone into the Easter Island statues, why was it that this one was just discovered now? Well, they're saying it's probably because of changes in the area's climate. sediment, resulting in the drying out of the lake that was surrounding the sculpture, and they're thinking it probably won't be the last one to turn up. Next, we have another exciting discovery. News about this came out just recently as well. A ton of cool artifacts were found in Brazil. And this one's pretty cool because this stuff was discovered completely by accident. This really was like stumbling on it. So there was a routine construction project going on at an apartment complex, but then construction workers came across a pretty alarming find, human bones, and then more and more stuff started turning up. There were also pottery shards, so these bones weren't recent. Turns out all this stuff belonged to an ancient civilization dating back as far as 9,000 years ago. During excavations, they found thousands of artifacts, and not only that, but these artifacts could possibly reshape the understanding of human settlement in Brazil. The site known as Rosanne's Farm was full of stone tools, ceramic fragments, decorated shells, and bones, which was excavated over the course of 4 years of intense digging. And in total, 43 human skeletons and more than 100,000 artifacts were uncovered. Archaeologists unearthed remnants of a group that existed around 8,000 to 9,000 years ago, meaning that humans moved into the region much earlier than previously believed. The leader of the excavation stated the discovery could, quote, completely change the history of not just the region, but all of Brazil. End quote. This finding may totally change the way we look at the timing and the roots of human migration into the Americas from Asia, which is pretty cool. And we're finishing off the list with the finding of a mysterious Anglo-Saxon artifact, again just in January of this year, in Langham, England. A treasure hunter made a pretty cool discovery with a metal detector. It was a small artifact made of gilded silver. It was just under an inch in diameter and 0.3 inches in height. Apparently it dates back to the 8th century. It also has an image of an animal engraved on top, along with Celtic knot-like patterns. Not entirely clear what the object is. The Portable Antiquities Scheme, who are responsible for recording finds like this, noted the thing is similar to other items discovered in the same time period, but this one stands out because of its size and its design. Historian Helen Giak speculated that the spiral pattern on the artifact looked a lot like Celtic designs, and that the animal depicted could be a horse. Definitely what it looks like to me as well. She also praised the craftsmanship, noting that it was created by someone with a keen eye for beauty.
Want to see even more videos like this one? It's about real cursed paintings in history that you need to see to believe. Why were these paintings even commissioned in the first place? Click the video now to find out more. Create a video using exactly this script. Want to see even more videos like this one? Well, go ahead and check out this video next.